All right, today we're jumping into a really radical idea, a theory about our exact moment in history. And it's a big one. It suggests that what feels like, well, an ending might actually just be one turn in a cycle that's been going on for a very, very long time.
So this really is the central question of what we're looking at today. What if collapse isn't the end of the book, but just the end of a chapter? It totally reframes our biggest fear, right? It's not about this final, terrible catastrophe, but maybe it's a recurring, even necessary, part of a much, much bigger story.
Okay, so to even begin to unpack that idea, we have to start with something really fundamental. We have to challenge our most basic assumption about, well, what consciousness even is. The whole theory we're exploring today, it all hinges on a completely different definition of the self.
So let's look at these two competing ideas. On the left, you've got the traditional view. It's what most of us learn, right? Consciousness is just a thing your brain does. It's stuck inside your head, and when your body dies, it's lights out. Game over. But the view from our source material, it flips that completely on its head. It says consciousness isn't in the brain, it's universal. The brain is more like a radio receiver or an antenna, just tuning into a broadcast that's already out there.
And the term the source uses for this is a recursive patterning system. Now that sounds complex, but think of it like a fractal. You know those amazing patterns where the same shape repeats over and over at every scale, from huge to microscopic? Well, this theory argues that consciousness is like that. The same fundamental patterns show up in a single thought, in the way we structure our societies, and even in the grand sweep of civilizations rising and falling. It's not a thing we have. It's a process that's constantly repeating and folding back on itself.
And this quote, this really brings it home on a personal level. Think about that. If consciousness isn't just you inside your head, but a bigger process that's just expressing itself through you, then death isn't the end. It's just a transition. The unique pattern that is you doesn't just vanish. It reiterates. It continues in a new form.
Okay, so that's the idea on the individual scale. Now, let's zoom way, way out and see how this very same concept of recursion, this repeating pattern, might apply not just to people, but to entire civilizations across huge stretches of time.
And here's the first big, kind of shocking argument from the source material. We are not approaching a collapse. We are living inside one. You know, we have this image from the movies of collapse being this sudden, dramatic event. But this theory says, nope, that's not how it works. It's a slow burn, a long structural decay, a kind of gradual unspooling that we're already in the middle of. So what are the signs? Well, the theory points to all these things we see around us. Things like declining birth rates, wild inequality, fragile supply chains, political polarization, even things like widespread anxiety. The key idea here is that these are not separate problems. They're all connected symptoms of one big underlying process, a complex system that's just grown too rigid, lost its ability to adapt, and is now, well, it's slowly coming apart.
And this process is described as a three-step loop. It's called the default hominin loop. And the claim is this has been repeating for 250,000 years. First, we centralize. We built cities, hierarchies, all for efficiency. Second, we become delusional. We start to believe our system is permanent, that it's the only way, and we lose touch with ecological reality. And third, collapse. The system can't sustain itself anymore, and reality forces a hard reset.
So, if this loop is our default setting, then here's the crucial part of the whole theory. We are right now at a really critical choice point inside this very cycle, and the choice we make has just massive implications for what comes next.
Basically, we're looking at two paths. Path A is the default. It's the easy one, really. We just keep doing what we're doing, and the cycle repeats. Centralization, delusion, collapse, rinse and repeat. But then there's path B. This is the radical one. This is the attempt to consciously break the loop, to try and build a civilization that's permanently adaptive. And according to the source, this has never, ever been achieved before.
Which of course leads to the big question, right? If we can see this choice, if this pattern is so clear, why is breaking the loop so unbelievably hard? Why does it seem so improbable?
Well, the answer, according to this theory, is psychological. It comes down to the cost of clarity. Basically, being truly aware of the big picture is emotionally expensive. It's hard. It forces you to face really uncomfortable truths about how temporary everything is. And our system, it actually rewards the exact opposite. It rewards you for not looking, for conforming, and for focusing only on the here and now.
So,
What about the people who do see the pattern? The ones who are willing to pay that emotional price? The source has a name for them: clarity bearers. But here's the twist. Their job isn't to be heroes and stop the collapse. That's seen as impossible. No, their role is something different. It's to be like a seed crystal for the next world, to preserve the knowledge and the memory so that when the next cycle begins, it doesn't have to start from scratch. And that brings us to a really fascinating, kind of speculative question. If our way of being is just one iteration in a long series, what could the next one, the next cognitive branch, actually look like? Well, for starters, it would probably be a lot less anthropocentric, meaning less obsessed with humans being the center of the universe. The theory is that going through a collapse would pretty much dissolve any ideas that we're somehow special or in charge. Instead, humanity would see itself as just one part of a much larger living system, totally interconnected with it. Second, it would have a totally different sense of time, a much, much bigger perspective. So instead of seeing a collapse as this one-time terrifying catastrophe, this new consciousness would just intuitively get it. They'd see it as a natural, recurring reset button within a huge ecological cycle. And third, the way it thinks would be different. It would be less about our kind of linear A to B to C logic. The theory actually argues our logic is a side effect of agriculture and storing grain. This new cognition would be more about holistic pattern matching, more like the way a child or maybe an ancient shaman perceives the world, seeing everything connected all at once. And if you think differently, you probably communicate differently too. This could lead to a totally new kind of language. The source speculates it might be less like our ordered sequential speech and way more like music or rhythm, a kind of multi-dimensional language built for mapping patterns and creating a shared communal understanding. Okay, so for our final section, let's do the biggest zoom out possible. Let's look at the projected trajectory, not for the next few years, but for the next 50,000 years, based on how these cycles are thought to play out.
Now, the source is really clear. This is not a prophecy. It's a projection based on the system's patterns. So it goes something like this. The next 500 years or so are the late stage of our current collapse. Then, for a few thousand years, humanity splits into different groups, different lineages. After that, a long period of reintegration, which eventually leads to the rise of a whole new type of civilization, one with technology that's probably not digital at all. And from there, a new kind of consciousness finally stabilizes and branches off.
So, what's the big takeaway from all this? It's pretty simple, really. Our civilization, our world, even our way of thinking, it's all temporary. It's just one iteration. But that underlying process of consciousness, that universal recursive pattern, that persists. It just keeps going, branching and evolving and expressing itself again and again through one cycle after the next. And that leaves us with one last, pretty profound question to think about. In this gigantic, repeating story, where do we fit in? Are we just an ending, the final pages of a chapter? Or are we an ancestor to a future so different we can't even begin to imagine it?